When selling a business, three important considerations other than the price. Price is always going to be the headline of any transaction. How much is the company being purchased for? How much of financing, whether a loan or equity, is it receiving? However, there's other elements that are equally as important as part of the process that one wants to keep in mind when contemplating either selling their business, exiting their business, or seeking capital. So there's many of them. However, we'll cover three which are at or near the top of the list in any process that we undertake. And so the first of these is structure. So the purchase price may be X dollars. However, how much of that is at closing? How much is over time? Over time, is it in the form of a seller note? Is it in the form of some kind of rollover or carrying forward of equity into the next iteration of ownership? Is it predicated on performance, like an earnout, or is it much more like, as mentioned, a seller note, where it's just a matter of time, where there's an interest rate applied to it? And again, in some situations, acquirers will ask that the seller, particularly where there's ongoing involvement, retains a piece of the business, and perhaps sells 90% of the business and keeps 10% of the consideration as equity in the new business, in which case the conversation arises of, at what point will that next exit be? Or is there a point in time, and we try to negotiate for these, at which that portion can be monetized or liquidated, and so it's not just a perpetual equity investment that the seller has no control over. And so structure is a very important piece to consider, because it's not just what the purchase price says in the newspaper or online, right? It's how much will you receive, when will you receive it, what is the risk that you may not receive it, and what things must be done to ensure, or what risks must be mitigated or negotiated to ensure that as much, likely all, of the consideration is ultimately received by the seller. And so the second consideration is the employment or the ongoing involvement, the transition period for the seller. So there are some businesses that a seller can truly sell one day and walk away from. However, the majority of businesses have some sort of transition period. And this can be as short as 60 days. We've seen it as long as 3 years. It really depends on how the business is set up, obviously who the acquirer is, and these are all negotiated points as well, contemplating and taking into consideration what the desire of the seller is as well, right? Sometimes the seller says, I'd like to be involved in growing this in the next iteration. Sometimes they say, I really just want to retire, move on, etc. at this stage or in the immediate term. And so depending on that, it becomes a consideration and a negotiated item in every transaction. And what we'd like to see is, even if a seller is sticking around for some period of time to contribute to the ongoing growth of the business, we do not want all of their risk, again, tying back to structure, being allocated to these sellers in that process, right? We always say you don't want to trade ownership for a job, right? Maybe it's some sort of unique situation where you do not own the business anymore and you're involved. However, there's ways of doing that where it's not the same stress, pressure, expectations as a job would be, right? Because that's not what someone wants. If they've run a business for 30 years, they're not looking to trade that in for a job, right? They're looking to take more things off their plate, not add more things to it. And most acquirers certainly are cognizant of that and work amicably and readily with us to accomplish these goals for our clients, depending on what their desires are. And lastly, certainly not least, is the treatment of affiliated parties. And so what we mean by this is, not every acquirer is going to have the same idea as to what is going to happen to all of the employees, what's going to happen to the real estate, what's going to happen to the geographical location of the business, the name of the business, and other considerations as well. And so these are often negotiated into part of the transaction as well. And so the party that comes to you with the highest offer to buy the business may say, well, the day after we buy the company, we're going to fire everybody. We're going to move the plant from Michigan to Tennessee, and the name's going to be changed from ABC to XYZ. In some situations where someone is prepared their teams for a situation like that, or it's been discussed, or it's not as high of a priority, that's okay, right? There's a different flavor for every transaction. However, if that is a priority, and it often is the case, then it's something that needs to be contemplated and incorporated into the transaction, whereby it's another lever, gear, or variable that needs to be contemplated in the overall calculus of the deal, right? So you're going to have price, you're going to have structure, you're going to have ongoing involvement, and then you're going to have leverage to discuss, negotiate, and come to a compromise on what is going to happen to all of the other important parties that in many cases have played a pivotal role in the growth of the business, and so is something that sellers want to, or parties receiving capital want to take care of. Again, many variables to consider outside of just the price, but when contemplating a exit or receiving capital for a business, three very important categories to consider are A, the structure of the transaction, B, the ongoing involvement or transition period or transition of the seller, and C, treatment or ultimate outcome for other important parties, or affiliated parties as we like to describe them in some of our situations. So that's the thought for today. Keep pushing forward. God bless. We'll see everyone next time.